Check the description for the following discount codes. The most obvious and asked question about the new load cell kit for these CSLs from Fanatec is how does it compare to the T-LCMs from Thrustmaster? They're the closest in price point when you sort of factor in the load cell upgrade and what have you. And it's a very good question. Now, just a point to note, I've got the optional faceplates on here as well, not the standard plastic ones. So just something to bear in mind, that is a little bit extra as well. Now, a lot of this will be personal preference. So we're going to skip over a couple of things very quickly that are definitely personal preference. This is all metal, this is mostly plastic. The only thing that's metal on here is the actual pedal arms themselves and the faceplates. Whereas on here, everything's metal except the standard faceplates, which are plastic. So it's up to you whether you prefer plastic construction or metal construction. We don't know whether one will wear out quicker than the other long term. You know, that's entirely up to you. And the same goes for the looks as well. It's going to be up to you whether you prefer this look or this look. Again, personal preference, that's up to you. So let's talk about how they feel. And speaking of how they feel, there's going to be no footage of me using these in this video. I know there'll always be someone that goes, oh, this video was useless. You didn't put any footage of you using the pedals up. Unless you've got some sort of sim racing foot telepathy that allows you to feel what my foot is feeling through my videos, it makes no difference whether you see me press these like this or with my foot. But if you do want to see footage of me using these, look at the individual reviews. Anyway, let's talk about the differences and how they feel in use. First and foremost, the load cell brake pedal. Now, we know there's no adjustment for the load cell brake pedal on the Fanatec CSLs. This polymer stack here is how it comes for now. Maybe they'll bring out a tuning kit later, who knows? But that's what you've got for now. With the Thrustmasters, you can change these springs here. Now, these are the heaviest springs in here right now. And comparing the two back to back, the Fanatec pedal is much, much heavier. I can push this all the way till it bottoms out by hand without really any trouble. This one, I've got absolutely no chance of pushing that and compressing all those elastomers. So this is a much heavier and harder to press pedal, and as a result has much less travel. Because if you set the braking force slider in the Fanatec control panel to 100%, meaning it will use all of its 60 kilogram load cell measuring capacity, you have to press this pedal ridiculously hard to hit 100%. Like my GT Amiga chair is literally creaking backwards to do so. With this pedal, even though it has a 100 kilogram load cell, and I'll explain why this is in a minute, you can easily reach 100%, as I've just demonstrated. That's travel, mind you, that isn't pressure, but even with this plugged into the USB port of my computer, I can reach 100% braking force by pushing it with my hand. And you might think, Carl, how does that make any sense? That's a 100 kilogram load cell at the bottom here, and this is only a 60 kilogram load cell. So how can that be? Well, here's the thing. It's not about so much the pressure the load cell can measure up to, once you're beyond a certain point. Obviously, if you put a 1 kilogram load cell in these pedals, then you'd be able to hit 100% really far too easily. But once you're above a certain point, it almost doesn't matter. What matters beyond that point is the geometry of the pedal itself and how it actually applies force to the load cell. Now on here, the Fanatics, the load cell is literally directly straight line to the back of the pedal face where you push it there. So there's no, or very little, leverage assisting your foot to apply pressure to this load cell, which means it's harder. And what this is all about is leverage. If you were to put, what's the easiest way to describe this? If I was to make this pedal this long and you pushed it up here, it would be way easier to hit 100% braking force, 60 kilograms on the load cell. If I was to get this pedal and chop the top off, so it's like flush with the elastomer stack here, you'd have to press so much harder. A bit like if you were to sort of put your foot here and try and depress this brake pedal down. It would be so much harder to hit the maximum 60 kilograms of force that the load cell can register. And that's what these two specs actually mean. It's how much pressure the individual load cells can register. It's not the pressure you feel at your foot or the amount of pressure your foot has to apply, because leverage is in play. If we now look at the Thrustmaster pedals, this pivots at the bottom here, as does this one, but then we've got this arm that comes up here, and then the pressure is applied downward to the load cell. And in addition to that, there's another arm that branches off up here where you actually put your foot on the pedal. So you've got additional leverage helping you push against that 100 kilogram sensor. And that's key here. It's a 100 kilogram sensor. It can measure up to 100 kilograms of force. So don't be fooled by this only being 60 kilograms of measuring capacity. That is not any sort of reflection of how hard you have to press the pedal. And as you can see, with these two sat here back to back, I can depress this one down with ease, and this one I can probably barely move like 25% of its travel. And if I put all my body weight on it, you know, I'm still not fully compressing those elastomers. So this is a much heavier and harder pedal in use and just in demonstration compared to this one. The only thing I haven't got in here right now is you can actually put a couple of washers in the middle here that remove this initial bit of compression there. You see with two fingers I can compress the silver spring, but that's neither here nor there, because once that's compressed, now we're on the reds, which is as hard as they get, and it's the reds that I can quite happily compress with my hand without any trouble at all. And again, this one, I really can't. So if you like a stiff brake pedal, which has a short throw, this is the one to go for, not this one. And as far as the actual force required to hit 100%, if you go in their respective control panels and put the braking force up to 100%, they're both about the same, as in the amount of force you really have to put through your foot to hit 100%. Even though this has more travel, what you've got to remember is we've got two different things here. We've got travel and then pressure. Once the travel is fully completed, so these red springs are compressed, then it's just about how much harder you press the pedal, almost like a first stage. Well, the silver spring's the first stage, effectively. So once you compress these like that, that isn't quite, you know, that's not 100% yet. You then have to apply a load more pressure to hit 100% force. Whereas with this, there's very little travel before you then have to apply the extra pressure needed to hit 100% force. In fact, this probably isn't quite as hard to hit 100% as what that one is actually. It was hard to measure because obviously I'm swapping pedals over and then I'm using my foot and I'm watching the gauges and going back and forward. I think this probably was a little easier to hit 100% braking force actually than what this one was. But in reality, there's not a whole lot in it. What you'll choose, what will be your preference, is do you like a harder, stiffer brake pedal that doesn't move very far, or do you want one that has a lot more travel in it and is nowhere near as hard to move before it reaches the end of its travel, and then you're just talking pressure after that point. And this is the heaviest or the strongest springs in here as well. So that's the differences. Harder, much less travel; softer, much more travel. And probably that's the most important pedal out of them all, really, because, you know, your other pedals, your clutch and your accelerator, the clutches are both linear clutches. There's no simulated clutch spring that you're overcoming or anything like that here, like there is on the V3s. They're just linear. What is different, though, is how smooth the pedals feel. And this applies to the accelerators as well. The springs on the Fanatec pedals are actually at the base of the pedals here. And they're a spring that goes round the axle that these pivot on, and they have like two little arms that come off and push against the pedal here and against the base. And so you're kind of twisting the spring like this as you operate the pedal. These ones have springs just at the bottom of the pedal, just how this operates in actual fact. And so when you're pushing these pedals, you are squishing a spring here. Now, that feels completely different to this. This operation, these are so much smoother. They almost feel like hydraulically dampened by comparison, whereas these very much feel like you're getting a spring and you're going boing, 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 boing. It literally, you feel it almost bouncing. It's hard to describe, but it's very noticeably a fake pedal, you know? You're like, oh yeah, I'm just squishing a spring. It just wants to ping back, look, twang. Whereas these, whilst of course they ping back as well, they just feel, hello Ori, they just feel smoother in operation. And I think it's because it's a spring that's twisting like this rather than compressing a coil. It's almost like with this, as you get toward its full travel, that coil spring's compressing to its maximum and it almost feels a little harder, whereas these are much smoother and sort of remain the same level of force the whole way across their travel. Now, as far as how hard they are to press goes, my hands and my feet both report back, I would say, that the accelerators are very, very similar, and the clutch pedals, I think the clutch is a bit heavier on the Thrustmaster, but again, doing this, I'm very much reminded that this feels like you're just squishing a spring, whereas these don't. These are much smoother and nicer in operation. And you know, someone said to me about the accelerator in the comments in another video, you know, you're able to modulate your throttle and what have you. And the reality of throttle pedals is they almost make no difference, right? These flashy ones that you can pay £1,500 for that come with a hydraulic accelerator pedal and load cells are completely pointless and just a waste of everyone's money. In real life, an accelerator pedal is just a pedal face and a return spring to ping it back up when you let off. And it's either a cable that runs to a mechanical throttle body, or there are potentiometers or hall sensors on the pedal itself, just like you would find in Logitech pedals, or these pedals here have got hall sensors. That's how they work in real life. There's no hydraulic accelerator pedal or any dampening or pneumatics or anything like that. It's just a sprung-loaded pedal with a form of travel measurement, either hall effect or potentiometer, or a cable if you're old school, pulling the throttle butterfly, and that then has a potentiometer on the side of it to measure the position of the throttle butterfly. Funnily enough, called a throttle position sensor. So don't get hung up on the accelerator pedals. As long as they are smooth and you're happy with how far they travel, I suppose that might be something worth just talking about. What is the travel like? Again, it's very, very similar. They almost travel exactly the same distance. So there isn't a whole lot of throttle pedal technology to chat about anyway. And with these linear clutches, the same thing applies. They're nothing like a real clutch in a real car. This one feels very much like you're just squishing a spring, and this one feels a bit like the accelerator, just a bit heavier, you know. But these are entry mid-range pedals, so you're not going to get fancy clutches. But that's probably all we need to talk about. My preference, shorter throw, harder brake pedal, overall smoother operation of these because it's a twisting spring rather than a compressing spring on the other two pedals. And I prefer the appearance, especially if you pay extra for these face plates. This one, personal preference, if you prefer the look of this and the plastic construction, that's entirely up to you. Much lighter brake pedal, even with the heavier springs in, much further travel. The other two pedals very much feel like you're squishing squishy springs and aren't particularly smooth by comparison. So, and finally with these load cells, in use, set to maximum, probably not a lot in it, maybe a little bit easier to hit 100% on the Thrustmasters than it is on the Fanatics. And again, do not get hung up on 60 kilogram versus 100 kilogram. This pedal has a load of leverage that assists it. This one does not. So the reality of that is your foot has to press pretty similarly to reach 100% on either pedal. But yes, I think that's probably it. Any questions, stick them in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching and take it easy.